The Trump administration is rolling back decades-old protections for nearly 60 million acres of national forest. The so-called roadless rule had prevented logging, mining, and road building in designated areas across more than 40 states. The new changes would open those sites, it's about a third of national forest land, up for development. Environmental groups quickly denounced the plan, but the administration called the move common sense and said it would jumpstart timber production and aid in fire prevention. For more, we're joined now by Kirk Sigler, a national correspondent for NPR who covers the western U.S. Kirk, it's great to see you. So it was President Clinton in his final days in office who used his executive authority to protect tens of millions of acres of national forest. Give us a sense, how vast was the area that this rule covered, and what's at stake now if these protections are rolled back?
Well, this at the time was huge, and it's interesting for those of us who've been covering public lands for so long. This issue had kind of gone away, and then suddenly, like a lot of things in the Trump administration, here it is back. When President Clinton first signed it as he was leaving office, this was a huge decree of protections, or we should say added protections for national forest land across the country, largely across the West here and in Alaska. And when he signed the decree. It, of course, then was litigated for years and years. But I think looking back on it, it's interesting to think that this really did set a precedent for future Democratic presidents anyway. President Obama went on to use his pen and executive order to protect large national monuments in Utah and other states. So looking back on the roadless rule, it sure did lead to a lot more protections and a lot of controversy because, by federal law and traditionally, it's Congress that has to designate wilderness areas.
And these forests that we're talking about, many of them are remote, they're hard to reach. I mean, do you expect that we'll see a surge in logging and mining and drilling and development?
Well, this is a kind of hard question to answer right now because, like anything, I kind of hate to compare it to, say, the onshoring of domestic manufacturing or that push to sort of bring logging back to places like the Pacific Northwest, where I'm talking to you. This will take years, and as you say, a lot of these roadless areas are very remote. They're also hard to reach, expensive to develop, and it's not, in many cases, politically popular. Looking at the Tongass National Forest in Alaska, this has been subject to controversy for years. Closer to home in the Pacific Northwest here, the Frank Church River of No Return and the adjacent roadless areas adjacent to that wilderness area in central Idaho, just vast. These are places that aren't necessarily easily going to be developed, and the timber industry has been pretty, I would say, curtailed, at least in the Pacific Northwest recently, in the recent years, really since the 80s and 90s. So it's very hard to imagine right now just immediately flipping a switch and saying these places are going to be logged because a lot of the timber companies that are left have really moved to private land for a number of reasons.